3 minutes. That's how long it took for my faith in suburban humanity to flatline. Not in a war zone, not in a blackout trauma center, not even in the middle of a hostile evac under fire. Nope. Right there on Magnolia Lane, under porch lights and pastel mailboxes, a woman with a Bluetooth earpiece and a superiority complex blocked a damn ambulance from saving a dying cardiologist. And 11 minutes later, landed a med chopper square in the middle of the HOA's Holy Grail, their regulation manicured golf course. Her face? Priceless. My name's Jack Deacon, and I've flown through monsoons, mortars, and mid-air mechanical failures, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the carnage of Willow Bend Meadows and its self-appointed queen, Clarissa Vaughn, a woman who treated HOA laws like scripture and herself like the Pope of property. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you're into real stories with justice, jaw-dropping twists, and just the right dose of HOA madness, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode? It gets even wilder, and believe me, the kind of storm that's coming, you'll want a front row seat. I had just finished a brutal 14-hour shift, 3 medevac calls back to back, and all I wanted was to drink something cold and fall into a bed-shaped coma. Instead, I found myself in my garage, elbow deep in a lawnmower carburetor that decided to throw a tantrum the minute I looked at it. The garage door was open, air was still, and everything sounded normal until it didn't. I heard what I thought was furniture being dragged across the floor of Dr. Mabel Rivers' house. She lived across the street and, despite being 74, was more active than most teenagers. She was a retired heart surgeon who once fixed her own mailbox using surgical gloves and zip ties. But that night, something felt off. Another thud, then a faint, breathless cry for help, the kind of sound that cuts through all your logic and slaps your training awake. I dropped the wrench, wiped my hands on my jeans, and ran across the street. When she didn't answer, I checked her spare key spot. Gone. I peered through the window and saw her collapsed by the armchair, one hand clutching her chest. That's when instinct beat manners. I picked up a decorative garden gnome, sorry buddy, and shattered the glass. Inside, I did the drill I'd done in war zones. She was breathing, but shallow. Blue lips, weak pulse. Classic cardiac event. I called 911, gave the exact specs, and stabilized her in the recovery position. Dispatch said the ambulance was 12 minutes out. That's when I remembered the HOA gate, the steel and brick tribute to exclusion. That locked up tight after 10 p.m. It was already 11:30. The ambulance wouldn't get in unless someone opened it. I heard footsteps near the HOA office. That's when Clarissa showed up, wearing a power suit like armor, hair like a helmet, and a smirk that could freeze antifreeze. Hair, in one hand, a remote control, in the other, the kind of self-righteousness only found in people. I ran toward her, trying to stay calm. "Ms. Vaughn, it's an emergency. Dr. Rivers is having a heart attack. Please open the gate." She looked at me like I'd just asked to paint her mailbox lime green. "Mr. Deacon," she said, her voice colder than an airport sandwich, "emergency vehicles are not permitted between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Noise Ordinance, Section 8. Paragraph B. I blinked. "You're quoting bylaws while a woman's dying?" She pulled out her phone and began filming. "I'm documenting this for the board. Mr. Deacon is becoming aggressive." I wasn't yelling yet, but I was boiling. "Clarissa, she could die!" Her eyes sparkled like she enjoyed it. "Rules are rules. She should have planned better." "Planned better for a heart attack?" I swear I felt a neuron snap. Inside, I snapped back. "Fine," I said. "If you won't let them in, I'll bring her out." I sprinted back, lifted Mabel as carefully as I could, and started the 400-meter jog toward the back gate. Rain started, because of course it did. Carrying 120 pounds of unconscious determination while slipping on wet pavement isn't in any HOA handbook. But I kept going. Halfway there, the paramedics met me. We transferred her onto the gurney. Her heart stopped. For 30 seconds, I thought I'd lost her. They revived her, but just barely. As the ambulance drove off, I turned and saw Clarissa, still filming. "Thanks for the footage," she said. That'll go great in your disciplinary hearing. And just like that, soaked, shaking, exhausted, I realized she wasn't just cruel. She was calculated. And she had no idea who she'd just started a war with, because this wasn't about a lawn code or a gate anymore. This was personal. Tomorrow, I'd stop being polite. Tomorrow, I'd fight HOA fire with federal-grade fury. A $3,000 0-cents fine. Yep, you heard right, for saving a life. That's what landed in my mailbox a few days after I hauled Dr. Rivers through the rain and wrestled with a locked gate like it was some medieval siege. The letter was thick with legal jargon, so dense it could have been a script for a courtroom drama. It proudly informed me I'd earned 8 out of 10 violation points. 2 more and boom, I was out, evicted, outlawed, the HOA's version of a public execution all dressed up in bureaucratic lingo. It felt like I'd flown choppers through war zones, dodged bullets, and yet here I was, bested by a coven of rule-obsessed suburban tyrants armed with clipboards and remote controls, who knew real battles came with community guidelines. But the fine was just the opening salvo. As I sat there, staring at that official stationery that reeked of power trips and perfumed resentment, I started digging. Public records, neighborhood forums, even the whispered gossip of the Sunday barbecues. What I found wasn't just petty HOA tantrums. It was a pattern. Families quietly pushed out through escalating fines and nebulous violations. Then their houses snapped up by relatives of the board members themselves. Below market value, of course. It was like a twisted game of Monopoly where the banker's family always wins and everyone else just gets to flip over their go-to-jail cards. That's when the rage hit, a kind of slow boil mixed with disbelief. This wasn't a community. It was a racket disguised as a cul-de-sac. Here's the irony you'll love. I can pilot a helicopter through hostile fire, emergency landings, and no-fly zones, but try getting through Clarissa's HOA rules and suddenly you're the one outmaneuvered by a woman armed with a remote and a rule book thicker than the manual for my medevac chopper. You'd think that saving a life would earn you a medal, or at least a thank you card. Instead, I got a summons that might as well have read, "Congratulations, you're officially the neighborhood's public enemy #1. The satire of it all? That this suburban battlefield was fought not with weapons but with paperwork and petty power plays. It's like bringing a bazooka to a bake sale and realizing everyone else has armed tongs. Just when I thought I was peeling back the last layers of this HOA onion, ready to expose a corrupt empire built on lawn standards and intimidation, Trash Day came. Yes, Trash Day, an unlikely but perfect plot twist. Because what Clarissa threw away one rainy morning wasn't just garbage, it was the proof of her unraveling. Torn-up letters from her own daughter, pleading for sanity and mercy. Shredded attempts to hold on to a family she was tearing apart with her obsession for control. It was the kind of evidence that made you stop and rethink villains. Were they born cruel or made that way? It was a reminder that even tyrants have a breaking point, and sometimes their weakest moments are the ones that change everything. So here I was, fine in hand, war brewing in the shadows, and a new piece of the puzzle falling into place thanks to something as mundane as neighborhood garbage. The lines between right and wrong, friend and foe, were blurring faster than I could process, and just when I thought I had the upper hand, I realized this wasn't just a fight about me. It was a fight for the soul of the whole neighborhood, the kind of fight that doesn't just demand courage but demands you think 10 moves ahead, because in Willow Bend Meadows, the game had only just begun. Trash Day rarely feels like a plot twist, but that morning it was my unlikely source of clarity. Sorting through Clarissa Vaughn's bin, because who doesn't keep an eye on their HOA queen's garbage? I found torn-up letters, scattered like broken confessions. Letters from her daughter, Marissa. Handwritten pleas for mercy, therapy, and sanity, crumpled and discarded like yesterday's secrets. You don't shred letters unless they hit nerves paper can't hide. It was like finding a cracked mirror reflecting a villain's fractured soul. Suddenly, the iron-fisted HOA queen seemed less like a cartoon tyrant and more like a woman battling ghosts we couldn't see. And that shifted everything. And with that emotional freight weighing heavy, I shifted gears from medevac pilot to strategist. Military instincts kicked in: assess, analyze, prepare. There's a difference between fighting an enemy you see and an enemy hiding behind layers of family pain and power plays. So I picked up the phone and dialed Officer Rick Mendez, a local cop who, unlike most, still believed the badge meant something. I told him the story. Block ambulance, fines, and now shredded letters. Rick's voice grew serious as he said, "Jack, if what you say is true, Clarissa's actions could qualify as felony obstruction of emergency services. This isn't just HOA drama anymore. It's criminal." That line, cold and official, was the jolt I needed to know I wasn't just venting into the suburban void. This new revelation added a whole new layer to the story. Clarissa wasn't just a petty bureaucrat enforcing noise ordinances. She was a danger. A person who, behind her polished smile and power suits, had crossed a line from rigid rule keeper to a real threat to her neighbors. And yet, this wasn't a story about evil incarnate. It was about a woman trapped by her own fears and failures. The daughter's letters painted a tragic portrait of a family tearing itself apart. It made me wonder, how often do we mistake brokenness for cruelty? How many times do we stand against a monster without realizing we're fighting a wounded person? At the same time, this new empathy didn't weaken my resolve, it sharpened it. Understanding your opponent's pain is a tool, not a handicap. It's the difference between brute force and strategy. As in combat, knowing the enemy's weaknesses is crucial to winning without unnecessary bloodshed. Clarissa had declared war on me, but I was quietly preparing. The battlefield wasn't just the HOA office or the gated community. It was the fragile, tangled web of personal history and community trust. And trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to rebuild. So here I stood, caught between the rage of being wronged and the sorrow of what lies beneath. The story was no longer just about fines or gates. It was about redemption and ruin playing out in manicured lawns and official letters. And with every step forward, the stakes grew higher. I knew the next moves would determine not just my fate but the future of Willowbend Meadows. And believe me, the quiet before the storm was about to end. The day of the hearing felt less like a neighborhood meeting and more like a cheap courtroom drama filmed in someone's basement. Clarissa Vaughn showed up, decked out like she'd just stepped off a rerun of The West Wing. Power suit sharp enough to cut glass, hair pulled back so tight it could have held a gavel, which, as it turned out, she'd actually brought. She banged it on the table like some amateur judge auditioning for a reality TV show. The whole setup screamed faux justice. But her confidence was real, bordering on delusional. Watching her try to play judge, jury, and executioner all in one was like watching Reagan's ghost trying to impersonate Nixon's cousin. Entertaining? Absolutely. Convincing? Not a chance. Clarissa wasted no time launching into her evidence-edited security footage that conveniently cut out any context, showing me helping Dr. Rivers and selectively trimmed audio clips making me sound like I'd lost my mind. Then she called on a trio of loyal neighbors, the kind of people who smiled politely at community barbecues but turned into legal parrots when Clarissa gave them a script. They testified like clockwork, parroting phrases about community standards and disorder. I swear one of them even threw in protecting our property values with a straight face, as if I was the one trashing the neighborhood by saving a life. It was absurd theater, but the crowd was watching, and Clarissa was betting on intimidation to win. But then it was my turn. I stood up, looked around the room full of neighbors I'd shared weekend barbecues with and kids I'd helped fix bikes for. I didn't need to shout. I just let the truth speak. I presented bank transfers showing suspicious HOA fund diversions to Clarissa's personal accounts, emails where she'd manipulated official communications, and invoices for legal fees that made it clear this wasn't just about rules. It was about greed. Marissa arrived just as the room started murmuring, carrying a banker's box that dropped onto the table with a decisive thud. Inside, 18 months of receipts, emails, and bank statements. Solid proof that Clarissa had been embezzling money while playing the righteous HOA president. The room shifted from skeptical to stunned, the tension crackling like static before a storm. The confrontation between mother and daughter was electric. Marissa's calm, determined voice cut through Clarissa's bluster like a scalpel. "Mom," she said, "this isn't just about money. It's about what you've done to people, neighbors, friends, and this community." Clarissa's composure cracked. For a moment, the tyrant's mask slipped, revealing a woman weighed down by years of control and denial. The crowd sat silent, watching the fall of the Iron Queen in real time. There was a strange beauty in the moment, a catharsis born not from victory or defeat, but from the unveiling of truth and the hope for something better. But here's the thing about tyrants. They don't vanish when their crowns fall. They reload, regroup, and come back with a vengeance. Clarissa's empire may have crumbled that day, but the war for Willowbend Meadows was far from over. And as I looked around the room at neighbors buzzing with newfound awareness and questions, I knew this hearing was just the opening salvo in a much bigger battle, the kind where power, pride, and pain collide in ways that don't fit neatly into HOA bylaws or courtroom scripts. If this story or its lessons hit home for you, please share it with a friend who might be facing something similar. Sometimes the best help is just a click away. And hey, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think about this whole HOH showdown. Your thoughts might just start the next conversation. At 3:47 a.m., my phone buzzed like a fire alarm in a library. Loud, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. But this wasn't a routine alert or a call for help. It was Clarissa Vaughn's latest weapon, an HOA-wide email blast accusing me of the worst possible sin in any suburban neighborhood: misconduct with children. The subject line screamed warnings like "Dangerous Resident Alert" and "Protect Your Family," while the message itself was a carefully stitched quilt of lies and half-truths. Photos taken out of context, innocent moments twisted into sinister scenes. I saw myself teaching a kid how to fix his bike, cropped to make it look suspicious. Another shot showed me helping a neighbor's child with a drone, framed like I was a secret agent in a bad thriller. Overnight, the smiles and waves vanished. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid me. The community I'd tried to be part of suddenly looked at me like I was carrying a contagious disease. It was a betrayal sharp enough to cut through all the armor I'd built over the years. Work was no refuge. My supervisor called me in, eyes full of uncomfortable pity. "Ben," he said, "HR's received some complaints. You're being placed on administrative leave while they investigate. 3 tours in Afghanistan, hundreds of lives saved, and now my career was on the chopping block because of fabricated emails and a neighborhood witch hunt." The irony was brutal. I'd risked my life in hostile zones, only to be sidelined by neighbors wielding gossip-like weapons. This wasn't a battlefield marked by trenches or gunfire. It was a silent war, fought with whispers and digital daggers. Trying to clear your name in a world that's already decided you're guilty is like shouting underwater. No matter how loud you scream, no one hears. The shadows of Afghanistan crept into my thoughts. I remembered Sergeant Williams, a good man who'd been falsely accused of misconduct by an informant with a grudge. His unit ostracized him, suspicions circling like vultures. Months of investigations dragged on, the weight of accusation crushing his spirit. One night, alone in his barracks, he chose the only escape he felt was left. His final note said he couldn't live with people thinking he was a monster when all he'd ever wanted was to protect them. His death wasn't just a loss, it was a warning about the cost of false accusations and the cruelty of mistrust. I felt his pain deep in my gut. How do you fight when your enemy is unseen, when your weapons are lies and your shield is suspicion? How do you prove innocence when the court of public opinion has already spoken? Then, just when the darkness felt unbearable, Dr. Mabel Rivers appeared at the hospital helipad, the place where I'd sought calm amid the constant drone of rotor blades. She walked up, frail but determined, and handed me a yellowed newspaper clipping, its edges worn but its message clear. It was a photo from 2 decades ago, me standing beside a medical helicopter, next to a young boy with his arm in a sling, smiling despite the chaos around him. That boy was Tommy, Dr. Rivers' grandson. The very boy I'd saved when a school bus crashed in a remote field too dangerous for other helicopters to land. The memory flooded me, the impossible decision to touch down in a tiny clearing, the urgency of those moments, the fragile life that depended on me. Hearing that story reminded me that this fight was bigger than me. It was about every life I'd touched, every future I'd helped save. They didn't shoot me, but they shot my name. And sometimes, reclaiming that name takes more courage than any battlefield rescue. Sitting there, clutching that faded photo, I realized the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about clearing my name or saving a reputation. It was about standing up to a darkness that threatened to swallow a whole community. Clarissa's lies were poison, but truth was a powerful antidote, and I was ready to deliver it. So, with a mixture of resolve and quiet defiance, I made a call. Not just any call, but one to an old friend who owed me a favor, someone who understood that sometimes justice needs to come from above in more ways than one. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of October day where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I was ready. The community of Willow Bend Meadows had no idea what was coming, but I did. I was about to remind everyone that the same hands that land helicopters in emergencies can also land truth squarely in the middle of lies. Because sometimes, when your name has been shot at and your character assassinated, you need to fly above it all and show the world what real justice looks like. Monday morning arrived like a punchline you didn't see coming. I rolled out of bed, still feeling the sting of Clarissa's smear campaign, but fueled by a resolve thicker than the morning fog settling over Willow Bend Meadows. The plan was simple: land a medevac training helicopter right smack on Clarissa's pristine golf course, that suburban sanctuary she worshipped like it was the holy grail of HOA control. I set up my phone to live stream the whole thing, half expecting maybe a dozen neighbors to watch. Instead, the viewership climbed like wildfire, hundreds, then thousands, tuning in to watch the slow-motion unraveling of a neighborhood queen's empire. As the rotors kicked up a storm, sending grass clippings flying and sprinkling the neighborhood with a dust cloud that looked more like a miniature tornado, I landed with textbook precision. The golf course, always off-limits except to meticulously scheduled maintenance crews, now served as my impromptu stage. It was poetic justice served hot and airborne. Nothing prunes rosebushes quite like rotor wash, I thought wryly, watching the perfect hedges shudder under the blast. Neighbors poured out of their houses, phones raised, their faces a mix of shock, curiosity, and something resembling hope. It was a spectacle that no HOA meeting or email campaign could ever match. Clarissa appeared at the edge of the course like a war general caught off guard on her own battlefield, her watering can still in hand, her expression twisted between fury and disbelief. She tried to scream over the din, but the noise of the helicopter and the crowd's murmurs drowned her out. For the first time, her carefully crafted armor cracked, revealing a woman unmoored and unraveling. Watching her struggle to maintain control was like seeing a dictator losing grip on a crumbling regime. The Queen of Willow Bend Meadows was spectacularly losing her crown right there in front of the neighbors she'd ruled with an iron fist. I stepped out of the helicopter, my uniform crisp despite the chaos, and grabbed the microphone linked to the live stream. "Good morning, Willow Bend Meadows," I began, voice steady and clear. "I'm Jack Deacon, emergency medical pilot for the county. Today's demonstration isn't just about emergency response. It's about exposing what happens when power is abused behind closed gates." I laid bare the smear campaign, the false accusations, the embezzlement evidence, and the obstruction of emergency services. The viewers watching the stream ballooned past 1,000, and the neighborhood's skepticism began to melt away, replaced by murmurs of disbelief and support. Justice was landing in real time. As Clarissa made a last desperate lunge for my phone to cut the stream, neighbors stepped in. Frank Morrison and a couple of others formed a human shield, blocking her path. She spun around, wild-eyed, pointing fingers and shouting accusations that now sounded more like a desperate plea than command. "You're all conspiring. You think you can take my community away." Her voice cracked and the hysteria was palpable. It was clear her grip was slipping, and the people she'd bullied and manipulated were no longer buying the act. The contrast was striking. A woman who once held absolute power, reduced to a panicked figure shouting at ghosts. Just then, Officer Rick Mendez arrived, lights flashing but sirens silent. He stepped into the chaos with the calm authority of a man used to diffusing domestic storms. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said firmly, "please step back and calm down." Clarissa's meltdown wasn't just embarrassing, it was a legal liability. Meanwhile, I addressed the live stream viewers, explaining the legality of the training exercise and the filings with aviation authorities. The crowd, both in person and online, was hanging on every word. This wasn't just a helicopter landing, it was a community waking up to the truth. Then, cutting through the noise, Marissa Vaughn appeared, walking steadily across the golf course with a purpose that silenced the crowd. Her silver hair, a softer echo of her mother's rigid style, framed a face lined with determination and fatigue. Clarissa's rage turned to something close to panic. "Marissa, what are you doing here? These people manipulated you," she hissed, voice cracking. But Marissa ignored her mother, focusing instead on the broken woman before her. "Mom, it's over," she said quietly but with unmistakable strength. "The lies, the control, the power games, they're done. Let me help you." Watching Clarissa collapse onto her knees on the grass, sobbing like a child who'd lost everything, was a moment both heartbreaking and necessary. The live stream had soared past 2,000 viewers, capturing a moment that words alone couldn't describe. I ended the stream with a simple message. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. Sometimes you have to rise above the conflict to clear the air. Thank you for watching. Remember, communities thrive on trust, honesty, and looking out for each other. Power had been challenged and toppled, but the story was far from over. As I walked toward Marissa and Clarissa, hoping this was the beginning of healing, I knew one truth remained clear. Power doesn't go quiet when it falls. It retreats, it reloads, and it waits for the next moment to strike. If you're as shocked as I was watching this power play unfold, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss what happens next. The story's far from over, because when power retreats, it's only a matter of time before it comes back with a vengeance. Stay tuned for the next chapter, captivating you both believe what Clarissa does next. Walking into the district attorney's office that morning felt oddly familiar. Like stepping into a quiet battlefield where grudges, hopes, and negotiations tangled together like barbed wire. Officer Rick Mendez was already waiting, clipboard in hand, wearing that look of a guy who's seen too many HOA disputes spin wildly out of control. He laid out the facts in stark terms: obstruction of emergency services, embezzlement, defamation, the whole mess that had turned Willow Bend Meadows upside down. But instead of demanding the full force of prosecution, lock 'em up and throw away the key, we talked about something nearly radical in today's zero-tolerance culture: restorative justice. The idea that some wars are better ended not by the hammer, but by the handshake. Because sometimes you don't fix a broken fence by kicking it harder, you fix it by pulling out the nails and starting fresh. Clarissa Vaughn surprised us all. After weeks of raging denial, public outbursts, and desperate attempts to cling to power, she agreed, maybe a little too willingly, to resign all her HOA positions, pay full restitution for the funds she'd been funneling into her own pockets, enter anger management and psychological counseling, and issue a public apology to the community she'd tormented. It was a soft surrender for a woman who'd ruled with a steel fist, who had believed herself untouchable, but beneath the armor of entitlement there was a flicker of something rare: the acceptance of responsibility. Watching her sign those papers felt like witnessing a monarch reluctantly abdicate her throne, and for once, the kingdom could breathe. The following HOA meeting was packed tighter than a rush-hour elevator. The community center, designed to seat 20, held at least twice that number, all buzzing with anticipation. Clarissa sat at the head table, but the usual power suits and perfect hair were gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. When she finally stood to speak, her voice cracked like peeling paint. She confessed to her abuses, the obstruction of emergency medical services, the lies she spread to ruin reputations, and the damage she'd caused to neighbors who trusted her. Tears streamed down her face, not the crocodile kind, but genuine remorse born of reckoning. Dr. Mabel Rivers, who'd been quietly observing from the back, rose and delivered what felt like a benediction. "I forgive you," she said, her voice steady and warm. "And I thank Jack for reminding us that strength isn't about dominance. It's about knowing when to show mercy." The room erupted in applause, a release not only of anger but of hope. Mercy in this moment wasn't weakness. It was power tempered by wisdom and courage. It was the kind of grace that stops cycles of vengeance before they consume everything in their path. This wasn't a scripted Hollywood redemption with instant transformation, but a real, raw moment of closure. No grandstanding, no melodrama, just an honest acknowledgement that healing is messy and slow. Like fixing a fence one post at a time, making sure each nail holds before moving on. Sometimes it means putting down the hammer and reaching out a hand, even when the temptation to strike back is strongest. And yet, here's the truth that settled heavy in my chest. HOA power doesn't die quietly. It moves, shifts, and mutates like a weed you thought you'd pulled out, but that finds new cracks to grow in. The battle for Willowbend Meadows had turned a corner, but the war itself was far from over. As I left that meeting, I looked out over those manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges and realized the battlefield had changed its face, but not its spirit. Tomorrow, when the sun rose again over this patchwork community, I knew I'd be ready. Because sometimes the hardest war isn't fought with fists or courts. It's the war to know how to end one. When Dr. Mabel Rivers was elected HOA president, it felt like the neighborhood finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. Gone were the days of iron fists and gate remotes wielded like weapons. Transparency replaced tyranny. Meetings were no longer staged dramas, but honest conversations where neighbors spoke, not shouted, about fences, noise, and that weird guy who flies helicopters. Mabel led with quiet strength, like a seasoned pilot gently guiding a turbulent flight, reminding us all that communities thrive when trust, not fear, is the runway. It was a new dawn for Willowbend Meadows, where justice didn't roar in like a helicopter, but landed softly, steady and sure. Meanwhile, I kept flying, training new medevac pilots to navigate emergencies with precision and calm. Every now and then, when the weather was clear and I had the aircraft, I'd land the helicopter on that same golf course Clarissa once treated like her personal kingdom. It was more than just a training exercise. It was a statement. A reminder that sometimes justice needs rotor blades, but more importantly that some rules are meant to be bent to save lives. Watching neighbors peek from their windows or gather quietly at a distance, I saw how our little community was slowly healing. The scars of conflict still showed, but so did the shoots of new growth. Clarissa herself had changed too, not overnight, and certainly not perfectly. She'd started volunteering at the local food bank, an act that surprised many who only remembered her as the neighborhood's Iron Queen. With Marissa's support, she was taking tentative steps toward rebuilding a fractured life and damaged relationships. It was humbling to see a once powerful woman learning how to ask for help and give it back. The image was a powerful metaphor, enemies becoming wounded neighbors, learning that sometimes the bravest strike is the one you don't make. After all, it takes more strength to heal than to hurt. Looking back on everything, the fights, the betrayals, the grudges, I realized justice with dignity lasts far longer than vengeance. Wrath might win battles, but mercy wins wars. Every HOA, every community, has its own landing strip for justice. Some just don't know it yet. It's where we bring down the chaos and uncertainty and find a way to land safely together. That's the kind of justice that builds neighborhoods, heals wounds, and turns former foes into allies. Because beneath every conflict is a chance to start anew. So here's the last thing I want you to remember. You never know when you'll be someone's emergency landing. A calm harbor in a storm, a safe place to touch down when the world's spinning out of control. Just pray it isn't blocked by a woman with a remote and a grudge. As I sit back and reflect on everything that's happened, from locked gates and broken windows to public meltdowns and quiet moments of mercy, I realize this story isn't just about one neighborhood or one power struggle. It's about the bigger truths we all face, the fight between control and compassion, the courage to stand up when rules fail us, and the strength it takes to forgive even when it hurts. Jack Deacon's journey shows us that justice isn't just about winning battles. It's about healing communities and choosing humanity over hate. That's a lesson worth holding on to. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think twice about the power of mercy and standing up for what's right, then please show some love by hitting the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part resonated with you the most? And if you want to hear more stories that bring justice, hope, and a bit of wild HOA chaos, subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode. Because sometimes the best stories come from the places we least expect, and the lessons we learn can change everything. Hey everyone, I want to hear from you. What stories or topics do you want to see next? Drop a comment below and let me know. Your ideas help shape the channel. And who knows, your suggestion might just be the next big story we dive into. So don't be shy. Tell me what you want to hear about. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay kind, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing we do is choose to be someone's safe landing.